Oh, and hello, Ben.
Shalom, shalom.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Good. A little under the weather, but I'll be okay.
Cold?
I don't know. Yeah, maybe like a little cold or something. Just feeling sort of crappy. It's a good reminder, though, how weak our bodies are.
Mm-hmm.
I sent you. I'm trying it out. We'll see if it's it looks okay. But I took the class we did last week, and I put it through like this, like one of these like AI things that gives you like a little summary. So I sent you this intro. I wanted to know if you wanted to open it up and we just go through the intro and just like a little summary, just to refresh on what we went over last week.
Yeah, for sure.
Unlike Pirkei Avot, these are a little like you can't really just run through like on the back just as easy.
Yeah. Let me see what the best way of doing that. Why can't I open it in preview?
In present? No.
I'm trying to wait a second.
Oh, I see RJ's here. Hello, RJ. And hello, Sandy.
Okay, so we'll just do it like this, I think. Not the best way, but
I guess I can't. I guess I could present it. No.
yeah, but I can break it up.
I guess you can do it instead of what you were just showing right now.
Yeah.
Add to stage. Okay. Let's make it draw bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So do you want to just run through this?
Yeah, I can run through this. So I can't make it bigger though.
All right.
This is what we got. What?
This is what the computer tells us we did.
Okay, here we go.
I mean, this is what the AI tells us we did. Yeah.
This is the hive mind's understanding of what's happening.
Right.
Okay, so in terms of,
and I took out the whole portion about like just the intro about the Rambam, who he is, historical, that I removed. We discussed, but this was more sort of the breakdown we were discussing, some things I was adding on, and like the text itself we were going through, like the intro.
Yeah. So kind of breaking this down in terms of the categories of the items that we were talking about. So one thing was morality as a political leadership, and it talks about Rambam's view. Mentions why the tractate of Avot, Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the father, is even included in the Mishnah. And then how it also speaks more to the judges, the people that hold authority, rather than the layman, even though it could speak to everybody, but really it is addressed to the judges because their moral behavior is a signal for everybody, and they also have the greater capacity, greater impact on society.
And we see this, I think I mentioned this last week, but unfortunately we have another example this week where, for example, there was a very unfortunate event in Israel politically with breaking into this army base, and there are government officials that are acting not in a moral way, and they are the signal, right? And they're sending out this message to most people, and it's it could be great, and it could be extremely dangerous as well.
Yeah. A lot on their shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
So talking about morality's core principles.
Again, this is all according to the Rambam, right? So we all have to constantly remind ourselves that we're not doing a general class about these concepts, generally speaking, but according to Maimonides in a specific time and a specific context.
Right. So he suggested core moral principles are embodied in legal systems, transforming abstract values into enforceable rules. And I would assume that he means, like in Judaism, the principles and the ethics are like embodied those, right? Because I mean, I remember seeing a video series on like medical ethics, for example, Jewish medical ethics, and it was talking about exploring differences between Western ethics and Jewish ethics. I'd say one of the differences that it was talking about that is in Jewish ethics, you can take an abstract principle from a completely different sphere and apply it to medical ethics. So like somebody stole something and how and what the dynamic there should be or the consequences, you can take that, the principles derived from there, and apply it to a medical context, which does not apply in a Western context. In Western context, you have a medical ethics and you have laws of ownership, and those have no affiliation with each other. Okay, so that was that. In terms of
this, the second point of the Guide to the Perplexed, we spoke about how he famously has his theological work, the Guide to the Perplexed. We call it the Guide, the Moreh, and he emphasizes that the leader should be measured and calculated, balancing compassion appropriately. So this is, again, focusing how the Rambam, while yes, he's also speaking to the individual, he's looking at the halachic system, the moral system, the political system. These how and this in the arena of men, the political system is how things actually get done, right? That's the game we play. So that's where he's focusing on as well. And of course, the backdrop is learning Pirkei Avot, or the judge that would be doing this, or the politician that is doing this, the leader who embodies the teachings of Pirkei Avot, right, is obviously taking these moral principles and embodying them in a system that he's actually doing in a way of life.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And now talking about the purpose of morality and the path to perfection. So we're talking about, first item is morality leads to great perfection and true success, which Rambam identifies as prophecy, right? So having prophecy in the Rambam's view obviously is the highest form of service or perfection of a person, which is it's on a different level than, I don't know if he would mention that as chassidut or piety or anuva, because like we said, prophecy is a gift.
That today.
Sorry?
I think we'll see how far we get today, but I'm thinking maybe at the end we'll just do like a small little breakdown of like the difference that Rambam has with the Kabbalists, because the concept nefesh that we use today is very different. Like the Jewish community, generally speaking, has adopted a lot of the Chassidut understanding of these concepts.
Right.
And while we hold Rambam with a high regard, we no longer view necessarily, we don't necessarily engage the concept of the nefesh, right, of the life force, which we'll get into this in today in the same way the Rambam sees it.
Right. Mm-hmm. And he mentions that the study of the ethics of the Avot is a step towards that higher level of prophecy, aiming for godly rather than just human perfection. And that ties into this point in terms of the reasons for the mitzvot, as much as we can tell them, which is the first one is the initial perfection, well-being of the body achieved through state and legal body. So that's kind of, I guess, this reflects the fact that in Mishnah Torah, he talks about how to, eat well and be a good person and do all those things so that you can prepare the body for, or you can prepare the body for the perfection of the soul itself.
I mean, it goes all the way back to, clean your room and stand up straight, right? Like Jordan Peterson lines of like, there's like the basics that have to happen. You got to act as a citizen of the world, which include like speak the truth, be careful with what you say, make sure that people that are talking to you, like, that think you're a normal person, all those things to make sure you're an integrated person.
Right. It's like if you open up a business, you need to, like, before you actually sell stuff and do things and like do the basic of what a business does, you need to get this license, pay like set this account up and, do all those things that are like the basics, the building blocks, and then that are kind of like can in some way be very mundane, but on top of them, you build your whole thing. Nachon. So virtues serve as a means to achieve the highest intellectual level necessary for prophecy. So I guess we'll touch on that too. Like,
we'll touch on that too.
Emphasis on the intellectual,
well, right?
And good deeds, charity, justice, righteousness, mimic God. Integrating phase 1, bodily well-being, and phase 2, intellectual perfection. Interesting.
It always, I'm like, wow, it sounds like we actually did some interesting stuff in there.
Yeah. Moral essence of prophecy. Talking about the Rambam was talking about the nature of prophecy, which is, in his view, a moral act and a form of communication between God and man, and not just fortune telling. Right. I remember us talking about that as well.
Right.
And how speech specifically is a moral act. And
prophecy being, revelation being, God speaking.
Mm-hmm.
The continuation of the act of creation.
Right. So prophecy aligns with God's acts of creation, highlighting the importance of good deeds and proper orientation for achieving prophecy.
Right.
And finally, talking about Rambam's sources and him saying that all of these things are things that he collected. He's not bringing anything new, right? So according to himself. And he cites 3 sources: Chazal, which are the Jewish sages, the Talmud, and various other sources, the world philosophers, and then common wisdom. I don't know how he mentions.
I guess the translation over here for common wisdom is like when he talks about that he, how does he say it? Let me open up the Hagdama, like I'm saying in his words. Okay. He says, ואפשר שאבי, ודע שהדברים אשר אומר בפרקים אלו, אינם דברים שבדיתי מעצמי. These aren't things that I made up myself, and not things that these are not novel ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I took them from, like we said, the sages, from the philosophers, ומחובורי הרבה בני אדם. Right, so that common wisdom was like, the things that are known out there. There's a common knowledge that we're aware of at the time. And then he has this famous line, which apparently the AI didn't think was important, which is Shema et haemet mipmi she'amra, right? Accept the truth. Hear the truth from he who said it. It doesn't really matter who says it. Another thing that we mentioned in the class was we challenge this by saying we know that in Judaism we say Kol omer davar b'shem omro mavi gula le'olam, right? One who mentions who the source is for this teaching that he's giving, he brings redemption to the world. And we spoke about how that's showing that the eternal nature of these words, of these concepts, and like that's how it's showing the everlasting nature of this world. However, Rambam response to that would be that yes, when teaching Torah, one has to be very careful where it's coming from and the source it's coming from to make sure it's very exact. Right. However, when it comes to and the Torah is a truth that needs to be unearthed. The things he's talking about right now, that what the philosophers know and the common knowledge, these are universal truths that he says are embedded in reality, and that's why it doesn't matter if he's saying it or if the guy down the street is saying it; it remains true regardless. And that's why he doesn't have to mention the source, because there isn't a fear of you saying like, oh, I guess Rabbi X meant this, and you'd be like, no, this is common knowledge that everyone knows, and
Right.
that's why there's also a self-correcting system to that.
Yeah, I have a chavut who I study the brachot with, and sometimes it says, I think it says Amri Inshi, or
Yeah.
Inshi, right? It says people say.
You'll say.
And he's always like, what is it like? How did they were able to get off, like not get off, but how are they able to just put people say, and that is valid. That is valid for the Talmud to say, oh, okay, people say, if people say, then we trust it. Don't you need to say, like, isn't it like one of the Tanaim, one of like the people, the sages, like how is this like enough? So I guess there is this difference between, these are like general wisdoms that we would get to that are just available to us.
Right? Like I'm saying, like wisdom in the world, the human nature has proven many times over, its great capacity with regards to its intellect and what it could understand and perceive from the world. And many of these things have clearly worked towards our benefit. And that's why they can't be ignored. The question is like where they are on the hierarchy of our values, how we look at these things, right? So obviously this is all part of the things we're going to be discussing. I'll just mention that, is it worth mentioning over here? Okay. So basically when it says over here about, you know what? No, it's going to take us to a different place. Forget it. Okay. So I think, first of all, what do you think about doing this in the beginning of each
we can do it. I think if we keep it, if we can keep it to like 15 minutes so it doesn't take off from the general discussion, I'm down with that. And,
okay, awesome.
Okay, let's go into chapter 1.
Into chapter 1. Okay, so I think we're going to do what we did last time, which is like we'll read through it. We'll read through it, and then we'll just sit down and just start sort of breaking down these ideas. Like just like the word nefesh, like there's a lot to talk about, right? And that's just
right. Yeah, I mean, he talks about the 5 levels. I think.
So okay. So do you want to take it away?
I can take it. Yeah. Okay, I'll start with do you want me? Should we do both the languages?
Or should we do both the languages?
It's not super.
Yes. It makes sense to do both the languages. Yes, let's do both.
Okay, let's do it. Once I get to the top. דע שנפש האדם נפש אחת, ויש לה פעולות רבות חלוקות. יקראו קצת הפעולות הם נפשות, ויחשב בעבור זה שיש לאדם נפשות רבות, כמו שחשבו הרופאים, עד ששם ראש הרופאים פתיחת ספרו, שהנפשות 3. Let me see something for a second. Okay. שהנפשות 3, טבעית וחיונית ונפשית, ופעמים שיקראו כוחות וחלקים, עד שיאמר חלקי הנפש, וזה השם יעשוהו הפילוסופים הרבה פעמים, ואינם רוצים באמרם חלקי או חלקי שהיא מתחלקת תחלק הגופות, אבל הם מונים פעולותיה החלוקות שהם לכלל הנפש כחלקים לכל המחובר מהחלקים ההם. Do we want to just pause here or do all of it?
I think we should do all of it.
Okay. ואתה יודע שתיקון המידות הוא רפואת הנפש וכוחותיה, וכמו שהרופא אשר ירפא הגופות צריך שידע תחילה הגוף אשר ירפאו כולו, וחלקיו מה הם, רוצה לומר גוף האדם, וצריך שידע איזה דברים יחלאו וישמר מהם, ואיזה דברים יבריאו ויכון אליהם, כן רופא הנפש והרוצה... יכוון אליהם, כן רופא הנפש והרוצה לתקן המידות, צריך שידע הנפש בכללה וחלקיה, ומה יחלה אותה ומה יבריע.
By the way, I don't know if you're noticing over here, like, the term refuat nefesh, right, comes from here.
Yeah. ומפני זה, אומר שחלקי הנפש הם 5. הזן, והוא הנקרא הצומח, והמרגיש, והמדמה, והמתעורר, והשכלי. וכבר הקדמנו בזה הפרק שדברנו אינו רק בנפש האדם, כי כוח המזון שיזון בו האדם על דרך משל, אינו כוח המזון שיזון בו החמור והסוס. כי האדם ניזון בחלק הזן מן הנפש האנושית, והחמור ניזון בחלק הזן מן הנפש החמורית, והתמר ניזון בחלק הזן מן הנפש אשר לה. ואומנם יאמר על כל ניזון בשיתוף השם לבד, לא שהעניין אחד בעצמו, וכן יאמר על האדם ובעלי חיים מרגיש בשיתוף השם לבד, לא שההרגש אשר באדם הוא ההרגש אשר בשאר בעל חיים, ולא הרגש אשר בזה המין הוא ההרגש בעצמו אשר במין האחר. אבל כל מין ומין מאשר לו נפש, יש לו נפש אחד בלתי נפש האחר, והתחייבו מנפש זה פעולות ומנפש זה פעולות אחרות, ואפשר תדמה פעולה לפעולה, ויחשב בשתי הפעולות שהן דבר אחד בעצמו ואין הדבר כן. והמשל בזה 3 מקומות חשוכים. והמשל בזה...
Let's when we get to the end of the light parable, mashal, or let's stop and we'll read in English and we'll continue.
Okay. והמשל בזה 3 מקומות חשוכים. האחד מהם זרחה עליו השמש וההיר, והשני זרח עליו הירח והאור, והשלישי הודלק בו הנר וההיר. הנה כל אחד מהם נמצא באור, אבל סיבת זה האור ופועלו השמש, פועל הירח, פועל אחר האש. Do you want to stop here?
It ends with בלי אמיתות.
כן, פועל הרגשת האדם, הוא נפש האדם, הוא פועל הרגשת החמור, הוא נפש החמור, הוא פועל הרגשת הנשר, הוא נפש הנשר, ואין להם עניין שיקבצם אלא שיתוף השם בלבד, והבן זה העניין שהוא נפלא מאוד, ייכשלו בו הרבה מן המתפלספים, ויחייבו ממנו הוכחות ודעות בלתי אמיתיות.
Yeah, okay. So that was a lot. Well, what do you say? It's funny?
Mitpalsef is like a word like in modern Hebrew. I've used it many times. I've never had an idea that it means like philosophers. So, yeah. Okay. I can do this in English as well.
Sure.
Yeah. Chapter 1, concerning the human soul and its faculties. Interesting. It has a small...
Even the fact that they're writing over here soul for nefesh is already like, I mean, the problem is the second is translated from Hebrew to a different language. You're already talking about commentary, not a translation.
Right, yeah.
But all good.
He has to pick one commentary. So yeah. Know that the human soul is one, but that it has many diversified activities. Some of these activities have indeed been called souls, which has given rise to the opinion that man has many souls, as was the belief of the physicians, with the result that the most distinguished of them...
That's Galanias, or Galan, in Hebrew Galanias, or whatever it says over there, number 3, if it gives you like...
Hippocrates,
someone else. I know of Galan. Okay, go on.
He states in the introduction of his book that there are 3 souls, the physical, the vital, and the physical. These activities are called faculties and parts, so that the phrase parts of the soul, frequently employed by philosophers, is commonly used. By the word parts, however, they do not intend to imply that the soul is divided into parts as are bodies, but they merely enumerate the different activities of the soul as being parts of a whole, the union of which makes up the soul, or the nefesh.
Isn't it sad that, like, reading in English, you're like, oh, now I understand what they're talking about over here. Okay.
And thou knowest that the improvement of the moral quality is brought about by the healing of the soul and its activities. Therefore, just as the physician, the medical physician who endeavors to cure the human body must have a perfect knowledge of it in its entirety and its individual parts. Just
medical
as,
school.
yeah, just as he must know what causes sickness and that it may be avoided, and must also be acquainted with the means by which a patient may be cured, so likewise, he who tries to cure the soul, the nefesh, the soul doctor, wishing to improve the moral qualities, must have a knowledge of the soul in its totality and its parts, must know how to prevent it from becoming diseased and how to maintain its health.
This is the psychologist.
See, a physician of the soul. So I say that the soul has 5 faculties. The nutritive, also known as the growing faculty.
Hamazin, right?
Hazan. The sensitive. The sensitive.
I know them as different names in English, but go on.
Yeah. The imaginative. The appetitive, and the rational. Okay. We have already stated in this chapter that our words. So go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
We have already stated in this chapter that our words concerns themselves only with the human soul. For the nutritive faculty by which man is nourished is not the same, for instance, as that of the donkey or the horse. Man is sustained by the nutritive faculty of the human soul. The donkey thrives by means of the nutritive faculty of its soul. And the palm tree, I know that palm tree, and sometimes it's palm tree, sometimes it's vulture, flourishes by the nutritive faculty peculiar or specific to its soul. Although we apply the same term nutrition to all of them indiscriminately, nevertheless, its signification is by no means the same. In the same way, the term sensation is used
homonymiously.
Great. For man and beast, not with the idea, for both men and beast, not with the idea, however, that the sensation of one species is the same as that of another. For each species has its own characteristic soul distinct from every other, with the result that there are necessarily arises from each soul activities peculiar to itself. It is possible, however, that an activity of one soul may be similar to that of another, in consequence of which one might think that both belong to the same class and thus consider them to be alike. But such is not the case. By way of elucidation, let us imagine that that three dark places are illumined. One is lit up by the sun shining upon it, the second by the moon, and the third by a flame. Now, each of these places there is light, but the efficient cause in one case is the sun, in the other is the moon, and in the third, the fire. So it is with sensation and its causes. In man, it's the human soul. In the donkey, it is the soul of the donkey. And in the eagle, the soul of the eagle. These sensations have, moreover, nothing in common except the homonymous term, which is applied to them. Mark well this point, for it is very important, as many so-called philosophers
Burns.
Yeah.
Shots fired. Okay.
Have fallen into error regarding it, in consequence of which they have been driven to absurdities and fallacies.
Right. We spoke a little about the calamists about this last week. We'll touch about it again. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that the AI didn't track that, but or didn't think it was important enough. Okay, so thank you for reading that. Let's start with the nefesh, right? So in this chapter, Maimonides is exploring the concept of the human nefesh, mm-hmm. Which in Hebrew means soul, like what we see over here, or neshama also, or it means life force. And it's, in this case, it's representing the essential vitality, right? That really allows us to be animated living beings. And it's also linshom. It's connected also to the word to breathe as well, right? So there's, I would say, 4 categories that we could look at nefesh. There's like a life force, right? So it's distinguishing from inanimate objects, right? So I'm not a tree, obviously, or a rock. There's the levels of the soul, right? So in Kabbalah, the lowest level of the soul is connected to like the basic instincts and survival, that would be called nefesh. In the biblical usage, it's different. That connects more to like, a living soul. And again, there's like a broad meaning, which you just said, like, or how people could sometimes use it today, which is like emotions, desires, and things like that. But generally speaking, we're talking about the life force over here, not necessarily the soul, right? Like I'm saying, the soul, we think about like it's hurting your soul. We're talking about the nefesh over here, the life force. And the two key points that we're going to focus on, one is explicit, one is we'll focus on more in chapter 2 and the last chapter, I believe, chapter 8. One is the oneness of the nefesh, right? So the concept that there's a singular nefesh is crucial for really moral accountability, right? So if I could, and as you can see, he's writing out over here that there's the philosophers and other people started breaking down these souls to different categories and call them each souls. Now you can imagine I right now rob a bank and the cops catch me and I'm like, no. That was my wild soul. That wasn't like me, right? So like, then I can't take responsibility because I'm split into these different peoples and really world responsibility to be undermined. So it's very important for him, again, at that time to speak about how, because clearly people were misunderstanding these concepts and he wanted to make sure if one is to take responsibility, AKA take on ethical behavior, AKA Pirkei Avot, right, as we're talking about, then it's going to be very hard if this person has a split personality or let's say a split soul, so to speak, with how he takes on responsibility and how he even sees himself.
Right. And you can throw the blame on, oh, well, that was another part of me that I don't necessarily control.
Right. So to have moral responsibility, I need to have the oneness of the nefesh. And if I have the oneness of the nefesh, then it kicks up the question of free will, right? Because once I can actually do that and I can have control of my faculties that way, that brings into question free will, which is, of course, a very, very important question. So that would be like the other thing we're going to focus on eventually, but that's like what it's alluding to or what's downstream, so to speak, from what we're talking about over here.
Yeah.
So again, nefesh ha'adam, that was the nefesh ha'adam achat, the oneness, the unified identity. So despite the fact that there's many aspects to ourselves, we really only have one identity. And I'm trying to shorthand this because the Rambam mentioned this. Like he goes over it like a few times as we could see in the English. So even like the evil inclination, as we talk about often in this little corner, at least the Jewish corner, is also a part of our will, right? It's not like an external force that I could be like, I had no control over.
Right.
And this unification of all these elements, parts of my nefesh, is vital, right? Like we said, I need to even understand my psychological well-being, and that's what we know today modern psychology does, right? I'm trying to take a fragmented person and put him together.
Right.
And we have people that are always struggling with their ego, with lust, with different emotions, with anger, and for many years, people thought that, I've been taken over by a demon, so to speak, right? Or I would even go as far to say that when the Ruach Ra'ah, the bad spirit falls on King Saul, right? That's also the question, is that someone that's clinically depressed? And at that time, we're calling it like a Ruach Ra'ah, but in reality, someone that's completely fragmented inside and actually needs, like the Rambam is saying, the doctors need to be specific. The psychologist needs to be specific. It's not going to be helpful if he starts talking to me about like, oh, well, that's just like the eagle does this and you do that, right? There's differences. And he's very careful about the mistakes that could happen with using the same terminology, but coming to completely different understandings with regards to humans and animals and other elements and other creations.
So two things. One, I'll just put it up there. We don't need to resolve it necessarily, but obviously this can be challenging to. In the Tanya, we talk about the divine soul and the animal soul.
Right? The Tanya and the Rambam, it might be challenging. Okay,
even though I'm sure that the Baal Tanya resolves that. Like for him, it's resolved. Like I just don't know how to.
Again, can you what's resolved? Just mention out the tension.
I'm sure that so obviously the Rambam talks about the danger of bifurcating or separating the soul into parts, especially as distinct parts, which is in a way the way that, and I think this is also specifically Chabad does it with having a divine soul and an animal soul, and talking about those as two different entities, at least as it's a language that they use, but it goes very deep. I mean, it's, I don't know how high you can take it.
The big difference, and well, I said like I would talk about this at the end, but like one of the differences that you're touching upon right now would be again, like as far as the Rambam, there's nefesh and neshama are not necessarily the same thing, and nefesh is sort of the infrastructure that's needed to reach higher levels of like a neshama and a full purification of your neshama. According to the Kabbalists, you're really talking about emanations that are all linked into each other. And the ramifications would be like, according to the Rambam, if you stick around at the level of the animal soul, then you don't have a place in the world to come. Or if you're a fool, you don't have a place in the world to come. And according to the Kabbalists, like you could even be a wicked person. However, since all those things are connected through a chain of ishtalshalut, the divine spark is always there, and there's always a place, sort of.
Right, we talked about that. Yeah. So I guess the other thing is, which could also be a way to resolve it, part of it, is that he tries to be very specific, or to emphasize the fact that some philosophers have used the language of parts, chalakim, in the past, not to denote parts of the soul as if it is like the parts of the body, like a hand, a leg, a head, but only to use that language to signify, well, there is this activity in the soul, and it's one part of it, and there is a different activity, right? So there's still unity, but we're talking about different activity centers.
Aspects. Right. I mean, saying like for us, this is so like rudimentary. It'd be like, yeah, obviously there's a unified soul, right? Like it would sound like gobbledygook for someone to come to you, but like, and hence the Rambam is, responding to this because he's aware of the philosophies of the time.
Right. Okay.
Or how does he say them? They're would-be philosophers. What do you call them?
The so-called philosophers.
Right.
And the mitpalsefim, which is a great word we should somehow translate into English. The philosophizers is like not, is maybe...
Or philosophizing, or armchair philosopher.
Yeah. But mitpalsefim has a much better...
Yeah, litfalsef.
Yeah.
The word today in Hebrew is atachofel. But
yeah.
You're digging. My cousin constantly tells me that I'm digging when I talk to her. Like I'm just going too deep, and she's like, I just asked like how your day was, not like what like the meaning of life is. Okay, so according to the Rambam, the functions of the nefesh. So he gives example over here of, let's say, he gives different examples over here, but let's say we'll take an example of like eating and loving, right? So the same nefesh that eats is also the same nefesh that is capable of loving. And we talk about these different aspects, right? So like we have our physical actions like eating that affect our feelings, and that is like eliciting like interconnectedness in my being, right? So this would be the example of like you are what you eat, right? In that sense, which is I'm not actually the... Rav Yehuda Leon Ashkenazi would say there's a concept called ochel nefesh, which has to do with Yom Tov. But he would talk about it in saying that ochel nefesh is another example of the food you eat is also, in a certain sense, like that's who you are, the way you're behaving, or the friends you have. All these things are different aspects. Specifically about eating, that's something that I'm putting inside my mouth, right? And we have these. We mentioned this also last week about how, while I'm eating and a cow is eating, we're both doing that act, right? A cow doesn't have to worry about the moral ramifications of eating the limb of a live animal, and a human does. Yet they're both doing the function of eating. However, they're both being processed differently, right? So that's one of the things that are very important for us to notice, because we're in the world today that like someone's gonna say like humans, we're very animalistic, the lizard brain, like that's what we are. That's what's controlling us. And obviously in Judaism and other world religions, we come and say like, no, we could surpass that. It's not that it's evil that we want to deny, but rather the quote unquote animalistic nature we want to raise up, right? We want even like the purest version of that behavior as well.
Right.
he also mentions over here, like there's like the medical perspective, right? That the Rambam, him being a doctor, he's also very sensitive as well. And he talks about how, the different aspects that were separated at the time. He mentioned gleaned, or they had a different the main physician, right? Rosh HaRofim. And he, of course, is influenced by Plato, and he gives down his breakdown of, let's say, the natural, the vital, and the rational, right? The rational is like the intellect and the reason. The vital, which in Hebrew, or according to the Rambam, would be chiyunit or behemit, is circulation of blood and motion. And we have the natural, which is the tzomachat, which is like the maybe like the physiological processes as well. Then the Rambam goes into 1 second. I have another written down version over here that I'm just looking at. He goes into the food called, right? So he's also talking about. Can you scroll down a little?
Do you want to mention something about like the? I guess it's a small point about like how you have a medical doctor, or like you have a physician that works on.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Which is like, I need to know these things also because, and we speak about this often. I might run to my rabbi with this issue, and I have to realize like this is not for the rabbi to answer, right? You're talking about like a melanoma that you have right now, and there's like, you might want to speak to your rabbi afterwards to try to figure out how to process this, right? But like as far as what to be done, you of course have to be very specific, and that's why in order to problem solve, things have to be identified and categorized properly. And if we're living in a world where literally means figuratively, obviously you could get into a trouble, or even using the word, even using a term in the wrong place could lead you to disaster.
Yeah. And in a small way, I guess it's also kind of reflected the, I might be spitballing here, but like when we think about Talmud Torah, right? Like the mitzvah or the obligation to study Torah, then one of the obligations is to study Torah so that you can apply it to yourself. Like this thing specifically is practical. You want to apply it. You want to make sure that you know how to heal your soul and how to avoid sickness of the soul. But also, and especially especially as he emphasizes in the first introduction, how this is directed to judges or people with authority. You want to be able to do that to other people, teach them that, and use your influence and your knowledge of the soul to perfect other people's souls as well, and help them perfect their souls. So I think that's might be an important point.
And that's a very much like a likutei moharan, right, concept, which we talk about a lot, which is like, the only way that likutei moharan feels comfortable saying about, engaging the wicked man and trying to find merit in him, right? That's all a conversation of like you identifying that aspect in his soul, you letting him see that aspect himself, him realizing that will then allow you to elevate him, right? So that's, you're talking about, in that sense, like a psychologist, right? Or someone, a psychologist would be the profession, but anyone skilled in understanding the soul or the nefesh,
right?
That would be the job, right? Engaging someone right now, even someone wicked, and trying to figure out together with him how we reconstruct.
Yeah.
So I think that was a very good point. Okay, so just because he mentions like the food often over here, if you could go to 1 second. Yeah, let's scroll down. Right, so he focuses a lot on the food, and he wants to stress that while again, eating is a action that's similar in all animals, including like our humans, right? So we spoke about how the dietary laws and the kosher laws and like how they have deep moral implications, and that's why we have to notice these differences. And we see again him using this different analogy. He takes the light analogy that you so eloquently read, and he talks about basically we spoke about the moon, the sun, and a flame. We know obviously today that the moon is also a reflection of the sunlight, obviously, but like we understand the concept that he's trying to say, right? So there's like a surface level distinction. There are clear distinctions between all these different aspects that we were talking about of light, as there's different aspects of the nefesh, right, that are necessary for moral behavior. Even though I'm calling them all nefesh, each one acts differently. I use the light differently. They illuminate differently as well, and they have different effects, right? The sun also illuminates, but it also creates a tremendous amount of heat, right? The light of the moon is a different kind of light, right? And of course, in Jewish tradition, we also relate to these different luminaries differently, and we have different prayers for these different luminaries as well. And now, I would mention though that the Rambam is of course also telling us that there's an underlying unity as well, right? So behind all these aspects is the oneness of the nefesh, right? So he's focusing right now how people divided this, but what's underneath that, he's constantly going back then and saying it's all one, it's all one, it's all one, ultimately. So we could look at all these different things, but it's all one with different aspects, which then which is the next part we're going to read, which he goes into now the 5 different aspects of the nefesh, and he breaks them down it's quite lengthy, but I think it'll go by fairly quickly.
Okay.
1 second. Let's make sure. Let's go back up because you're almost there, right? We just got there. So sensation causes in man, it's human soul. In the donkey, it's the soul of the donkey, and the eagle is of the eagle, right? So it's talking about these different nefashot. And this is what a lot of people got wrong. Okay, no problem. Let's continue with after this line. Yes, vashuv.
Okay. והשוב אל כוונתנו בחלקי הנפש ואומר, החלק הזן ממנו הכוח המושך, החלק הזן,
the nutritive one we were talking about, he's mentioning them again, and now he's going to expand on them.
break them down, yeah. החלק הזן ממנו הכוח המושך והמחזיק והמעכל והדוחה למותרות והמגדל והמוליד לדומה והמבדיל הלכות, עד שתפרש מה שצריך להזון בו ומה שצריך לדחותו, והדברים על אלו 7 כוחות, ומה יעשו ואיך יעשו ובאיזה איברים פעולתם יותר נגלה ויותר נראה, ומה מהם נמצא תמיד ומה יכלה מהם לזמן קצוב, זה כולו ראוי למלאכת הרפואות, ואין לו צורך בזה המקום.
I'll continue till the end now.
Continue until the end?
Yeah, I would continue because we just go through all 5 of them right now, and then we'll just give them we'll give a breakdown.
Summary, yeah. והחלק המרגיש ממנו הכוחות 5 המפורסמות אצל ההמון.
These are the famous, these are the senses.
Sensations, yeah. הראות והשמע והטעם והריח והמישוש, והוא נמצא בכל שטח הגוף, המישוש ספציפיק, ואין לו איבר מיוחד כמו שיש ל4 כוחות. והחלק המדמה, הוא הכוח אשר יזכור רישומי המוחשים אחר העלמם מקרבת החושים אשר השיגום, וירכיב קצתם אל קצתם ויפריד קצתם מקצתם, ולזה ירכיב זה הכוח מן העניינים אשר השיגם, עניינים שלא השיגם כלל, ואי אפשר להשיגם, כמו שידמה האדם ספינת ברזל רצה באוויר, ואדם שראשו בשמיים ורגליו בארץ, ובהמה ב1000 עין על דרך משל, והרבה מאלו הנמנעות ירכיבם הכוח המדמה וימציאם בדמיון. ובכאן טעו המדברים, הטעות המגונה הגדול אשר בנו עליו פינת חטאתם בחלוקת המחויב, והאפשר והנמנע שהם חשבו או הביאו בני אדם לחשוב, כי כל מדומה אפשר, ולא ידעו שזה הכוח ירכיב עניינים שמציאותם נמנע כמו שזכרנו.
We mentioned this a little last week, we'll mention it again.
והחלק המתעורר הוא הכוח אשר בו ישתוקק האדם לדבר אחד, או ימסהו, ומזה הכוח יבוא מן הפעולות, בקשת הדבר והבריחה ממנו, ובחירת דבר אחד והתרחק ממנו, והכעס והרצון והפחד והגבורה, והאכזריות והרחמנות, והאהבה והשנאה, והרבה מאלו המקרים הנפשיים. וכולי אלו הכוחות, כל איברי הגוף, ככוח היד על לקיחת הדבר ועל נגיעתו, וכוח הרגל על ההליכה, וכוח העין על הרעות, וכוח הלב להתגבר או ליראה, וכן שאר איברי הגוף הנראים והנסתרים הם וכוחותיהם קלים לזו הכוח המתעורר. החלק השכלי הוא הכוח הנמצא לאדם אשר בו ישכיל, ובו יהיה ההסתכלות, ובו יקנה החוכמות, ובו יבדיל בין המגונה והנאה מן הפעולות, ואלו הפעולות מעין מעשי ומעין עיוני, והמעשי ממנו מלאכת מחשבת.
I mean, we see this from the Bible. This has to do with Betzalel, but also the idea of computing. Machshev comes from that.
מחשבת. הוא ממנו מחשבי, והעיוני הוא אשר בו ידע האדם הנמצאות שאינן משתנות על מה שעליו, והם אשר יקראו חוכמות סתם, והמלאכת מחשבת הוא הכוח אשר בו ילמד המלאכות, כנגרות ועבודת האדמה והרפואות והמלאכות, והמחשבי הוא הכוח אשר בו יסתכל בדבר אשר ירצה לעשותו בעת אשר ירצה לעשותו, אם אפשר לעשותו או אם לא, ואם אפשר, איך צריך שיעשה. זה שיעור מה שצריך שנזכור מעניין הנפש, הנה, הנה.
We're almost at the end.
ודע שזאת הנפש האחת אשר קדם סיפור ספור כוחותיה או חלקיה היא כחומר, והשכל לצורה. וכשלא תגיע לצורה, יהיה מציאות ההכנה בה לקבל הצורה ההיא לבטלה. וכהלו היא מציאות הבל. והוא אמרו גם בלא דעת נפש לא טוב, רצו לומר שמציאות הנפש שלא תגיע אליה הצורה, אבל תהיה נפש בלא דעת לא טוב, אבל הדברים על הצורה והחומר והדעות כמה הם ואיך יגיעו, אין זה מקומו ולא יצטרך במה שנרצהו לדבר על המידות, והוא יותר ראוי בספר הנבואה אשר זכרנו, ובכאן אפסוק בזה הפרק ואתחיל באחר.
Okay, and remember the book of prophecy, he never ends up writing that. Right. Parts of it get put into the guide to the perplexed. So, okay, let's go through it in English.
Let's see. I might need to. Time flew by.
By the way, if you want, this is a great place to stop if you want to, and then next week we'll go through all this, all the 5 versions.
We might need to, yeah.
Sure. Okay, so let's we could stop it over here.
Wait, where did I go? That's not. That's too far.
Yeah, here.
Yeah, here.
No. Scroll down. This is the first time he mentions it. A little lower down.
My bad.
Here.
Okay, so yeah, I'll read this and then we'll recap and we can continue.
Sure. Let's read it in English.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Returning,
and I think we'll do this next week, but we'll try to map some of these also to, let's say, the 4 Ps.
That'd be nice.
I'm thinking.
Maybe yeah. No promises. Gleaned. Okay. Returning to our subjects of the faculties of the soul. Let me say that the nutritive faculty, all right, so this is the first part of the soul that you talked about before. It consists of 1, the power of attracting nourishment to the body.
Right, this is like the physiological concept.
Yeah. 2, the retention of the same, of the nourishment. 3, its digestion or assimilation. 4, the repulsion of superfluities. 5, growth, physiological growth. 6, procreation. And 7, the differentiation of the nutritive juices that are necessary for sustenance from those which are to be expelled. The detailed discussion of these, the detailed discussion of these 7 faculties, the means by which and how they perform their functions, in which members of the body their operations are most visible and perceptible, which of them are always present and which disappear within a given time, belongs to the science of medicine and need not be taken up here.
Notice, by the way, like he does this on the rest, but like he just gave a full explanation, then said like, but we don't need to expand on this right now. Like, okay.
Don't need to expand more on the explanation. Yeah. The second, the faculty of sensation, consists of the 5 well-known senses of seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, and feeling. The last of which, feeling, is found over the whole surface of the body, not being confined to any special member, as are the other four faculties. The imaginative faculty is that faculty which retains impressions of things perceptible to the mind after they have ceased to affect directly the senses which conceive them. This faculty, combining some of these impressions and separating others from one another, thus constructs out of originally perceived ideas some of which it has never received any impression, and which it could not possibly have perceived. For instance, one may imagine an iron ship floating in the air, or a man whose head reaches the heaven and whose feet rest on the earth, or an animal with 1,000 eyes, and many other similar impossibilities which the imagination may construct and endow with an existence that is fanciful. Right? And this, in this regard, the mutakalimun,
the kalamists,
kalam. Okay, so this is a particular sect, have fallen into great, grievous, and pernicious error, as a result of which their false theories from the cornerstone of a sophistical system, which divides things into the necessary, the possible, and the impossible. So that they believe, and have led others to believe, that all creations of the imagination are possible, not having in mind, as we have stated, that this faculty may attribute existence to that which cannot possibly exist.
Right. We mentioned we mentioned also last week how, according to the Maimonides, even God is limited in a certain aspect with like how things are done in this realm or in this in this level of reality. Where the Kabbalists obviously are going to have a different take over there, which is like the Kabbalists would say that the Kalamists were wrong at their level of interpretation. Right, like as in everything is possible at certain levels of reality, just not at all levels of reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. The other part, the appetitive,
the emotional, really.
The emotional, is that how you know it from? Okay. The emotional is that faculty by which a man desires or loathes a thing, and from which there arise the following activities: the pursuit of an object or flight from it, inclination and avoidance, anger and affection, fear and courage, cruelty and compassion, love and hate, and many other similar psychic qualities. All parts of the body are subservient to these activities, as the ability of the hand to grasp, that of the foot to walk, that of the eye to see, and that of the heart to make one bold or timid. Similarly, the other members of the body, whether external or internal, are instruments of the appetitive or emotional faculty.
Right. And obviously, at all times, you have to remember, right? So these are all things that, according to Maimonides, you need to put in proper orientation. Right. And then, obviously, only through that can you actually reach this, this level of the intellect, which is what we're going to, after the Hamitoreh, right, the emotional, we're going to get now to the Sichli, to the intellectual. I don't know how they call it here. Oh, reason. So the reasonal or the rational or the intellectual.
Right.
Which is broken down into two.
Mm-hmm. The rational part or activity or aspect of the soul. Reason, this that faculty that is peculiar to man, enables him to understand, reflect, acquire knowledge of the sciences, and to discriminate between proper and improper actions. Its functions are partly practical and partly speculative or theoretical.
Correct. So it would be theoretical, and it would be the like intellectual theoretical and intellectual practical.
Right. Iuni umasi.
Correct.
Right. So the practical being in turn either mechanical or intellectual. Right. By means of the speculative power or theoretical power, man knows things as they really are, and by which their nature are not subject to change. These are called the sciences in general.
Right.
The mechanical power is that by which the arts, such as architecture, agriculture, medicine, and navigation, are acquired.
Notice that medicine is there because, according to the Rambam, doctors, like I'm saying, medicine is not a hard science as far as they're concerned, astrology, because in which those are things I'm saying, those constants are there in science, like in medicine, where like there are new discoveries basically that could completely change how I look at these things. So at that time, for sure, Maimonides is aware of the fickle nature of medicine, and that's like he won't put that into the hard sciences, which, as far as he's concerned, are unchanging.
Mm-hmm. The mechanical power is that by which the arts... The intellectual power is that by which one, when he intends to do an act, reflect upon what he has premeditated, considers the possibility of performing it, and if he thinks it possible, decides how it should be done. This is all we have deemed it necessary to say in regards concerning the soul. Know, however, that the soul, whose faculties and parts we have described above, and which is a unit, may be compared to matter, in that it likewise has a form, which is reason.
Right. So this is we'll expand on this a little next week about the Aristotelian concept of form and function.
Right.
Form and matter.
Mm-hmm. Form, which is reason. So the form of the soul is reason. If the form reason does not communicate its impression to the soul, then the disposition existing in the soul to receive that form is of no avail and exists to no purpose. As Solomon says, also in the want of knowledge in the soul there is nothing good, in Proverbs. This means that if a soul has not attained a form but remains without intelligence, its existence is not a good one.
Or according to the Rambam, a place in the world to come is up for question.
Mm-hmm. Okay. However, this is not the place for us to discuss such problem as that of form, matter, and the number of different kinds of intelligences and their means of acquisition. Nor is it necessary for what we have to say concerning the subject of ethics, but is more appropriately to be discussed in the Book of Prophecy, which we mentioned elsewhere, and like Chezi said, did not end up penning, but parts of it were added to guide. Now I conclude this chapter and begin the next.
All right. So thank you for that. Next week we will go. I'll do a reading of that in English again, that last chapter, and we'll go through that, and then we'll continue. Was Wednesday better for you?
It might be moving forward. I have to see if this meeting that I have is a recurring thing, so I might have to move it.
So let's assume for next week we'll do Wednesday as well, and then you'll tell me if that makes sense or not.
Sounds good. If that works for you.
Catch you later, brother.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Very nice. I'm going to stay on for another... What time is it? 10:05. Another 5 minutes. Not long. Other work to be done. That's wrong. If they want. Nice to see you were here, Yoav. Ashrecha. Good night to you too, sir. Maybe we both wake up to a more calmer and more reasonable Israel. All right. Catch your cool cats later.